Sujin and Linda, welcome to Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I am really, really looking forward to this conversation. It's so important. I love your new book that you've got coming out, Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity. I'm just going to read from page 64 as a little bit of an introduction. In 2020, our Asian American communities experienced collective trauma on both a community and structural level. Violence against Asians, especially East and Southeastern Asians, increased significantly with the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and the rise in anti-Asian racism, evidenced in terms like Chinese virus and Kung flu. When people feel hate or anger towards a specific Asian country, Asians from many other countries become targets as well. This xenophobia has always existed in American culture, but for most Americans, it hadn't been expressed so widely and violently in the modern era until the pandemic. Well, thank you both for addressing this topic and putting this into a book that explains what's going on and gives people an understanding and tools to be able to understand what is happening and how we can actually help each other. So thank you so much and welcome to Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I think it's definitely really important to be talked about. Thank you for providing us with this platform to have this conversation.
Of course, of course. Well, there's so much I want to ask you, but I know there's such a long history. I mean, you even comment back in the 1800s, there was the issue 9/11, there was a massive issue. This is not something new. So I think that maybe the best place to start is I really like the way that you look at trauma, like you talk about invisible trauma. We all understand the big trauma, but you talk about invisible trauma. I'd love you to maybe start there and then let's then talk about the quote that I read, and I'm just going to hand it over to you.
When we talk about trauma, there's these evident things that we talk about, especially in the medical model, right? And so there's the things that we are avoiding trauma situations. There's a typical PTSD symptoms that we always talk about, right? And so those are the evident trauma symptoms when we talk about trauma typically. And for us, when we were working with Asians and Asian Americans specifically, we noticed that a lot of the trauma that we are residing with weren't really landing with the way that our medical model were defining trauma. And a lot of the times our clients weren't meeting the PTSD symptom specifically. And so they weren't being diagnosed with PTSD, right? Unless they were really hiding themselves with the way that they can function in the world, right? So once they aren't able to perform in their work, once they aren't able to perform in their schoolwork, right? Or whatever it is in their day-to-day life, like once they are not able to have healthy relationships, these are the ways that then they can begin to be treated for trauma. But the way that our culture and society has taught us is to be able to fight through the day-to-day, right? We still live with trauma. So a lot of our clients were able to show up for work and get the work done, even though they are suffering greatly with this internal battle that they were having, right? Even if it just takes them a lot longer to get things done, they would still get them done, right? So then in the societal lens, in even the medical lens, they weren't being acknowledged.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a huge problem. So, I want to quickly, just for a second, can you both give your background as well? Because you're talking about working with clients. So let's maybe begin. Sujin, do you want to maybe start with your background, and then Linda? And then I want to dive deeper into this because it's so important.
So my name is Sujin Lee. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. And I guess I can begin by where Linda and I met. So Linda and I met at community mental health setting, and we were mostly serving the refugee and immigrant, first generation refugee and immigrants at the time. And this was the older generation that have suffered through war and have been displaced and have ended up in the States. And so then when we were serving them, we recognized that talk therapy was really not working for them, especially in the way that they were brought up. And the way that they had to survive was oftentimes through hiding their identity and their survival method was through being silenced. So then all of a sudden to sit in front of somebody and to be asked to talk about what they've gone through was not a treatment model that worked well for them. And so then Linda and I just started talking to each other about other methods and ways that we can really help this community. And it really wasn't fitting with the system that we were working with at the time. And so then we developed over time different programs to be able to talk about trauma and talk about our experiences and our identity at the end of the day differently.
Hi, I'm Linda. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field over 10 years now. I mainly have worked with Asian refugees and immigrants, and also refugees and immigrants from other continents, other countries as well. That has been something that passionate of, because myself, Susan and I, we're also immigrants. Our families have immigrated to the United States when we were young. And we had this experience of growing bicultural, what it means to have our roots back in Korea, having expectation from my family to still follow the traditions and values, but also adjusting and having the expectation from school and society to become more American, whatever that means.
Yeah.
So, and that has been something that personally important to us, our journey. And we really got to see that through our work too. Like as we are walking through our own journey to heal our trauma, heal our identity, and reclaim that. Yeah, so that's my background.
Incredible. Well, I'm just all ears to hear what should be done and how you've changed, what the model is that you've both developed, which you beautifully lay out in your book, which I highly recommend. You have stories, you have practical little exercises that people can do. So the traditional model didn't work. You've talked about invisible trauma just briefly now, and we hear your background. With that in mind, can you explain what the alternative model is that you've developed and how it works? And the floor is yours. You can I'm not going to interrupt you. I'm just going to let you talk amongst yourselves back and forth, because I'm very, very interested to hear and very keen to learn.
Yeah, definitely. I know this podcast also talk a lot about body, mind, spirit.
Yes.
And that is definitely something that rooted in Eastern culture, in many Asian cultures. So we definitely talk about how our body, mind is connected, how a lot of our ancestors understood what is happening in our mind, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, were a lot of times explained through our somatic symptoms. And people sought out, like, Tai Chi is very traditional exercise people might have done, but that is also spiritual. Or going to acupuncture or herbalists, shamans, like different modality of people, practitioners, to really make sense of what is going on. Yeah, that's one of the models, one of the areas that we explore.
That's amazing. You're so right about the approach within this. Of course, my whole approach for the past 38 years has been one of a psychoneurobiological approach, which is the mind-brain-body connection, and how you've got to look at the person in the environment and what's going on, and how mind is embodied and it's driving everything. So yeah, we can't just look at the biomedical model. It has not been successful. It's created more problems, not just for Asian communities, but it's created for everyone. It just has not satisfied that need, because it's just labeling and limiting people. And that's what I think I really loved about your book, because I saw that you're looking holistically at people, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. I think it became very apparent to us, like I explained, because we were faced with the direct impact of the people that were asked to be silenced all of their lives in order for them to survive, like I said, right?
Terrible.
And then all of a sudden to talk about it, right? And to talk about it in a way where our mind and their experiences and how the way that trauma was looked at was psychological. So that we are really asking them the difficult questions that we were asking them, right? Was like, what happened to you, right? Tell me about your journey. Like a lot of the therapists will ask this question. And to them, it's like, that's not something I'm allowed to be talked about, right?
Yeah.
That was part of their survival. And if we look at the history, like, for example, the Khmer Rouge, that was literally what was happening when they talked about in the war, when they expressed who they were, what they did. I am a doctor. To identify themselves, I am a teacher in a very specific way. They were killed right then and there. Right. And so then all of a sudden you have this professional who is clearly in this authority figure to them, right? This professional that is an authority figure to them and ask like, who are you? What are you about? What have you gone through? And how can this be treatment of, a model of treatment for people that are clearly saying, no, I cannot talk about this. My instincts, my body, my entire being and spirit is telling me not to tell you who I am.
Yeah, it's not safe. So what do you do? What did you do in that situation?
Right. And so I think Linda touched on a little bit of the different methods that we implement. And we're not, per se, licensed practitioners of all of these different models of health, right? But it's about bringing the community, first of all, bringing the community together, and so that they can all meet together with people that are surrounded by others that have gone through the journey. So just gathering that group of people of its own healing journey, because we are okay to not talk about what happened. And yet we have a group of people that understand what happened, right?
Yeah.
I think that was a huge thing. And that's what we also talk about in the book, is going through this journey of finding community, finding ourselves and finding community, right? And so to have people that not just look like us, but we know that their experience, their identity aligns with how I identify myself is really important. And to create space and gathering places physically and even online, if it's too far away from each other, to be able to do that is kind of our first step. It's like, okay, I know what you've gone through, and I need you to meet with other people that have gone through that similar journey. And you both might not have to talk about it externally, but when you meet with each other, when you introduce each other, when you look at each other in the eyes, and when we create activities which surround our culture, and oftentimes it's really something as simple as let's make food together.
Yeah.
Let's cook together. Or let's do, as Linda mentioned, like Tai Chi together. And so then we bring in the other professionals into this group to create that healing space.
Oh, that's wonderful. So it's creating that safety. I mean, community is such a basic need as humans, and this is such an individualistic society. And it is how when we feel safe to be able to share our experiences and feel safe in our vulnerability with people that can identify, as opposed to trying to force someone who doesn't have a clue about what you're going through, cannot relate at all, to talk about it. It just doesn't make sense. So, I mean, this is absolutely essential.
Yeah, definitely. Like a lot of the times, with the next generation of children of immigrants or second, third, fourth generation that are Americans, we often get asked this question, like, how do I get my parents into therapy? Right. I think my parents need therapy. Like, they really need to talk about their trauma. They live it, right? On a day-to-day basis, they witness it. And for the younger generation, like our generation, we grow up with this awareness. We are always taking in this knowledge, right? We're listening to this podcast. So then we have this knowledge that there is a need for some kind of healing to take place, but we just don't understand how to connect with the older generation in order for them to get the help that they need. And the thing that our society is telling us, especially in the psychological society, is that they need to get into therapy with a therapist.
Yeah, sounds so simple, doesn't it? But it's not really. It's not really so simple.
Right. And the way that, we've changed over time, especially in the midst of COVID, is a conversation around what therapy looks like. Right? Because we've all been forced into doing this online telemedicine work, and that creates a lot of accessibility and yet barriers for connection as well. And so then we discuss with the children of immigrants, if they're bringing up the questions about how to get people into therapy and what does therapy look like for them, it's like, well, maybe it doesn't have to be with a licensed therapist or psychologist, psychiatrist is what they're really needing in their life, right? They might just need to find their own community first. And that could be a starting place for them to open up, to feel healed again.
Oh, I love that. It reminds me of a study that was done back in Zimbabwe where I was born and spent the first couple of years of my life. And there's no money for the biomedical model there. And which is, in a way, it's a very good thing because it was community, and they had this, they call it this granny who just basically, this one of the tribes who sat on one of the benches every day. It was like a log, and people would just come to her and talk and just share and talk and listen within that community. And it was so successful that Harvard and King's University in London did a study on this and found it was one of the most successful mental health interventions. It wasn't a professional, it was community, and it was listening and sharing and just being able to feel comfortable in a safe space to share whatever your experience was. That just reminded me when you were sharing that reminded me of that particular study and incident.
I love that. Yeah. I think in a lot of our immigrant communities, there's places of like getting together to play mahjong, like this ancient Chinese game.
Yeah.
And they all get together and they just sit there and they're just playing this game. And that could be a model that we can embrace in therapeutic model, right?
Does it stimulate, you find, in those situations? Does it then, as you're playing the game and cooking the dinner and eating together, does it lead to then conversations like maybe asking the older generation to talk about their experience and the younger generation listening? And so you've got the two generations sharing stories. I'm just interested, does that sort of thing happen how does it go? What is the sort of, what does it look like?
Yeah. I think when we approach hard conversations, we tend to approach it head on. Like, all right, we're going to dive in. Let's get into this, right?
That's great.
The way that our culture, especially in the immigrant culture, is taught us to be with hard or difficult conversations and difficult emotions is to hide them away. So to approach it, we really do have to play this long game. And cooking, playing games, playing board games, mahjong, all of these are great way to have this long, engaging conversation that we can circulate around the topic instead of just trying to dive right in and everyone rejects, right? We get defensive. We're like, I'm done, and walk away. It's exactly what happens with my parents, actually. It's like, if I want to approach them and say, all right, I'm really feeling sad, then all of us, I could see their body just freezing. Like, what? Like, what am I supposed to do with you?
Oh gosh. And what happens? What do you do? How do you handle that?
All right. And so I knew that that's not exactly the way that I have to approach emotional conversations with them. It's like, all right, let me help you. Like, what are we cooking today? All right, let me help you. And I'm going to ask them, I start to ask about recipes when we're cooking, because that's a natural way where my mom can start to feel really comfortable about talking about something that is so meaningful and emotional to her, right? And I'm asking her like, oh, where did this come from? Like, and I'm learning more about myself and finding healing within that too. And then I begin to talk about, recently I've been feeling this way and that. And the soup reminds me of the time when this happened or that happened. And then she's very receptive to talk about that, right? And say, you're right.
I love that.
Yeah. And so then we're actually having this conversation.
Oh, I love that. That's it. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. What we love about doing some activities that they are familiar with, they love, and then brings people connected is that it's also like mindfulness, right? You're mindfully engaging with your sensation physically and what is in front of you to make. Because a lot of times, especially survivors of war, refugees, first-generation immigrants, trauma is so real. I mean, we mentioned earlier Cambodia and Khmer Rouge. We had a lot of clients who could be hijacked if they open the door, like taken away when their parents are murdered in front of them. So we weren't gonna be able to talk about them because they really blocked it out. Like, I don't want to be hijacked. But they're able to be present, right? And then visit a little bit, share a little bit about it, right? It's a little more natural, easier in some ways, to relate while you're building that, way, being able to cope with those emotions that do come up, right? So we love doing activities they love that also bring connection, that also help them open up in some ways. We just cannot go straight on because they do have real trauma and that they are protecting that for a reason, right?
Oh, absolutely. They're terrified. I mean, it's a very imminent and real threat, and it doesn't just go away. What's happened to you? It's there. It's inside of us. So that's really, so to come in and it just shows you as humans, we just need that feeling safe. We need that community. We need to be able to just know I'm not the only one in the situation. Someone understands my fear. I'm not alone. All those things. It sounds to me like that's really a massive part of your approach.
For sure. Yeah. And so we work a lot with the next generation, right? The second, third generation. And to us, then the conversation of intergenerational trauma
I wanted to ask you about that. Yes, let's go ahead.
Yeah. So that's the big topic. And we approach it from having this conversation first about like, what is it that our parents went through? What is it that our grandparents, great grandparents have gone through? And I think oftentimes as, Americans, right, that have really been either born here and immigrated here, the idea of abandoning the past is imminent because we are told that we have to make adjustments in order for us to survive, in order for us to live, not only just survive, but in order for us to thrive. Like in order for us to really succeed in this society, we have to adapt. In order for us to adapt, it's as if we have to abandon what happened in our history. And so that's a really sad reality that we live with, right? And so then we open up this conversation with the younger generation about like, is it okay that we approach from the past? Like not from our personal past, but our historical past. It's really trying to understand, where do I come from? Because that part of identity we've been hiding ourselves from it. And to integrate it is going to be part of this healing journey. Not just finding our own community, but finding ourselves, right, is huge.
So do you find that's so interesting? Do you find in the younger generation, it's like an all or none situation? Like they're saying, in order for me to fit into American society, I have to completely put this aside. But you can't shut off who you are. So it's to create that blend. So my question is, are the majority of this generation trying to completely push the past behind? And that's affecting them because we can't, that's who we are. That's, as you say, that's your uniqueness comes from your cultural background, and no one should be forced to put that aside. That's not the point of humanity. The point of humanity is to accept each other for who we are and to celebrate those beautiful differences and to adapt to each other, but within our framework of who we are and where we come from. And that sounds to me like that's the problem, to get that balance. Is that the problem? And how do you talk through something like that? How do you help someone get through something like that? I know that's a big question and it's a short time, but if you could just sort of point the direction, because I think that's really fascinating.
Historically, as we talk in our book, Asian immigrants, just immigrants in general, immigrants and refugees who settle here, right, asked to assimilate, right? There is definitely idea of you gotta speak English, you gotta act certain way, you gotta adapt to survive, thrive. So that really added to that loss of culture. And I think it's again, third generation, at least millennials and up perhaps, have memories of being bullied, whether if they bring their own native food or they are dressing certain way. Like I certainly have been made fun of for my accent or the food I brought. And I told my mom, like, I just want sandwiches, no more my Korean food.
Yeah.
So kind of in some ways, if they are able to revisit those narratives that came from those experiences, and then see what did I internalize through these experiences. A lot of times we have, my clients and I definitely have a lot about, like, I felt inferior. I felt like my identity didn't matter. Like I had to like reject this part of me. So we talk a lot about learned belief that came from this traumatic, stressful experiences, and we figure that out and then heal those memories, revisit them, and then how do we reclaim it, right? And part of it is, revisiting like, hey, what happened to our family that I need to understand that brought me to where I am, like understanding and also rewriting our history, reclaiming, and also doing some inner child work, being able to really be that parent or be that adult figure that they needed in that time when their parents couldn't because they're also adopting, they're also surviving.
Wow. Yeah, that's a very, it's huge and so vitally important because of how if we feel bad about ourselves and scared about who we are and feel inferior or outcast, that's very destructive to our psyche and it makes us so vulnerable. So it's that outcast element that is extremely important to be able to change and to be able to manage that. So the community aspect is huge in helping with that. Now you've created a whole, like a program, and in your program you put into the book. So this is now available for people. Another aspect is this book is educational for obviously within Asian communities, but it's also, everyone should be reading this because the point I wanted to make is that it's also education. We need to educate everyone. Racism comes from people not understanding other people and not, I come from South Africa and that's, apartheid and racism and we can't, it's not comparing, but it is still the concept of if you're different, it's bad, whereas different is not bad, different is celebrated. And that comes from educating people. Right. In doing that education, do you find a difference in, for example, Gen Z versus millennials versus the older generation in terms of openness to accept differences more readily?
We're a product of our generations, right? The society generation that we grew up. So definitely there's some differences we see, and it makes sense, coming from, that generation, you had that experiences, right? And we're always evolving. Definitely, we do see younger generation, Gen Z, with the technology that connects people from all over the world, right? Connects so many different cultures, ideas. We do see them more open and celebrated, especially when we were growing up. Asian culture was not cool. Like Korean culture was not cool. We had classmates who didn't know where Korea was. So are you Chinese, Japanese?
Wow.
But recently, like just talking about Korea, like K-pop, K-drama, movies, really gained a lot of popularity, especially younger generation. That suddenly we became full people. One of my teen class with. So it's really that the message around different backgrounds and people of different culture. I feel like I hear more that they're more accepting of their identity. They celebrate, they're proud of it than generations before.
That's beautiful.
I love talking about food.
Right? So do I.
Yeah, because it's like such a healing method and embracing of everything that we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Our identity history and sensational things, right? And so I love talking about food, and I love that the next generation, I'm noticing them embracing part of their identity through food oftentimes. And so there's this huge movement around like fusion food, right? And I think that's a way for us to embrace, like, we just come from all these different backgrounds.
Love it.
And we can mix and combine our backgrounds and make something really tasty and beautiful out of it. And I think it's physical way for us to be reminded of that as we are taking in different types of food and mixing and making fusional food.
I love that. And I agree with you about Gen X. I think they're amazing. The way I feel like we're learning to, I'm 60 and I come from the Gen X generation, and I look at the Gen X and I mean Gen Z, and I just think, wow, this is just beautiful because it's eye-opening, accepting, celebrating difference, and openness to learn, openness to share. It's beautiful, and it's great that this generation is doing that, and they can then help the older generation. And talking about the food thing, I was invited to a very interesting sort of exercise. It's something. It's actually this guy's done a TED talk on it, and it's essentially where people get together, but they don't say anything about. It's just their name, not even their name. You don't even share your name. You don't share what you do. You just get together. There's normally 12 of you and you cook a meal together. And all you talk about is what you like and what you're interested in. But you don't give your name. You don't give your background. You don't give your profession. And then at some point in the evening, you just then, everyone goes around the table guessing what you are. So everyone gets a chance to guess who each. So it's one person, then all the other 11 guess who you are. And it's apps. And then the person tells what they actually are. And in that particular event, there was like a gold medalist, there was a astronaut, it was like really famous people, and how we kind of all didn't really guess correctly because we went beyond the outside external thing. And that's the point I'm making here. Right. The connection, the bond that was formed within an hour of cooking and eating a meal together was so different to if we had met formally with all of our official titles and all that kind of thing. And it just broke down that. And we became friends in a short period of time. And it was so leveling of the playing fields and so accepting of everything. So I just wanted to share that because what you were talking about that just reminded me of that experience, which was so amazing.
Love that. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to healing and new method of doing therapeutic work.
Oh, it's beautiful. And it's just so kind of natural and normal because the biomedical models made healing so much about you have to go to the professional. And I mean, you guys are professionals, so am I. But my whole work is to empower people to help themselves, which is what you're doing as well. And you don't have to be a professional. We all need to help each other. And it's more like the professional's the facilitator as opposed to the healer per se. It's we have to, So it's okay. Let's talk a little bit about in the few minutes we have left together. Just can you talk me a little bit talk us through the sort of layout of the book and how this can help people, if you wouldn't mind, either one of you.
Yeah. So Where I Belong, Healing Trauma, Embracing Asian American Identity, we have different elements of the book in here. And I love introducing this book to anyone and everyone because we have so many different elements. The first element is the psychoeducational part. And so it gives a lot of background into setting up for understanding our model of healing and trauma, intergenerational trauma, all the things that we touch upon today, right? But then there is also personal stories. And these are like stories that have been submitted to us by our community members. And we've interviewed and wrote these stories as well. So if you're not interested in the educational portion, you can just read the personal stories and have this deep understanding about what people were going through, what's in their minds, and really also connect into our own stories as well, right? And so making this community connection is part of this book as well. You're not feeling isolated as you're reading this. And then we have our journal prompts, which leads you through these different ways that you can reflect on yourself about the topic that we've discussed. And then the exercises, which is the whole healing somatic elements that we tie in this book.
Oh, that's beautiful. In a closing couple of minutes, could you maybe just take us through an example of one of the exercises? I know it's not like wouldn't be doing the full one, but I quite like this one on page 30, where you are dealing with the journal prompt 3. We've read 3 different Asian American stories, the house, that one. So let me not give it away. If you can just maybe, I thought that was lovely. I really liked that exercise. I liked all of them, but this one was really this stood out to me. Do you know which one I'm talking about? On page 30, and you've got to draw a house, an outline of a house like this, and fill the house with words and images. Just maybe briefly explain that.
So I love having imagery when you work with different exercises. And so I'm going to ask everyone right now, if you can, to have a house in your head, right? And so we're listening. So if you have a pen and paper, then you can do this together too. Grab a pen and paper. But you have an outline of a house, right? And you're going to fill the house with words or images that are going to be answering the following questions. And it's going to become this collage inside of this house. Okay. The first question is, what moments this week are you grateful for? Second one is, who are the people who help you through hard times? And then, what are some items or symbols that represent healing for you? And I'll just do one last one, which is one gift that you have received in the past that have brought you joy. Answer these questions and put them all into this house. And so in this house, you can carry this with you as a gift for the rest of this week.
I love that. Thank you so much. Well, how can people get hold of your book, and where can they find out more about both of you and the work that you're doing?
So, Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity is now available for pre-order on Amazon, Target, Barnes & Nobles, and others. And you can also visit us on our website, yellowchaircollective.com. We have a book page on the top that you can find more information about our book on our website as well. Also, you can follow us on Instagram, which is also handle name Yellow Chair Collective.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to put those links and details in the show notes so people can go and find out more about you. And thank you so much for the work that you do. It's amazing. I really enjoyed today. I learned so much, and it's really great. And congratulations on your new book. And I hope I'm sure it's going to reach many and help so many people. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for such valuable time today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much. All the best.